we have the next honor to hear from Maxine Lee about the artwork that was created in conjunction with the Chavruta with Rabbi Aaron Levy. And this is Peace, and this is Maxine Lee.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can all hear me all right. I seem to have come down with a cold in the past couple of days. So thank you. But yeah, I guess I'll just get right into it then. Rabbi Levy and I were learning Parshat Truma together. So this comes in close to the middle of Sefer Shemot, and it is the beginning of a big, long section of Parshat about the Mishkan. And it was really great to get to learn this with him. I think, you know, our minds work in kind of similar ways, which means that, you know, in some ways we can just keep, you know, running with something. I think in our first meeting, we started to read the Parsha, and we didn't get past the first pasuk, which is just by Daber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. I think as we went over to the Ramban's, you know, he has a big kind of opening statement about this Parsha and what the building of the Mishkan means in terms of the people's like taking it upon themselves to enter into this new relationship with God. And then we just, you know, went into like different midrashim and, you know, Agada from the Talmud. And really what is in this Parsha is just a big, long list of materials that the people brought. And I really felt that, you know, by the end of our learning together, I had, you know, this big, you know, palette of sources to kind of pick from and look at. And so I think several kind of made it in. And I guess from that, I decided to kind of, you know, work many materials into this work. I think you can see probably there are, you know, different beads and stones. There's tulle that I used for the pillar of smoke. There's some wool yarn and cotton in it as well. And in some ways I was a little intimidated coming into this, I guess. I have more experience working with textiles than I do with, you know, just painting. So, but, you know, this was kind of the image I had for it in my mind. So I decided, you know, just go for it. And there were some ways in which that process of kind of figuring it out as, you know, parts of it figuring it out, whereas as I went on, and, you know, other parts of it feeling more at ease with the technique, I imagine was kind of similar to the way the Mishkan was built in terms of, you know, you have like all of the people contributing to not only the constituent parts of it, but also, you know, putting things together. All of the women worked on weaving and sewing, and, you know, the men were all involved in the metalwork. And, you know, these are all people, I'm sure, who had done various types of labor in their lives, not necessarily the ones that, I mean, certainly in some cases, the ones that they were, you know, using to build the Mishkan, but those would have been kind of the leaders of those particular projects. whereas, other people had to learn, and in the end, created this magnificent Mishkan that they had. So I guess looking a little bit closer, and kind of thinking into some of the commentaries and midrashim that Rabbi Levy and I looked at, there are lots of, I guess, different ideas about what the Mishkan is. In some cases, it's compared to a chuppah. In other cases, it is either kind of like the seat of God or God's home amongst the people. And then out of that come these kind of different ideas of different configurations of relationship between God and the Jewish people. I think we're many of us are probably familiar with the idea of God and Israel being like spouses. If we think about Shir Hashirim, and also images of the people following God into the desert, like they're newlyweds. And so that definitely connects in with the building of the Mishkan as a chuppah. And, as I said earlier with the Ramban, the building of it is this act of kind of solidifying and, formalizing this relationship that they have, making it something that can endure. But then there are also other ideas, I believe, from the Psikta Dura of Kahana, where I think it's the kind of situation is that the Torah is God's daughter, and God has allowed the Torah to marry Israel. And but God doesn't want to part with the Torah, so he has the people build a Mishkan where he can kind of have a place to live alongside them, which I think is very sweet. I think so. This is just something that I've been thinking about recently, which I guess I hadn't been thinking about as much at the point when I was making this work, but lunch over Shmini Atzeret, I think one of my hosts was giving over this idea from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Zetzel, in which he described the relationship that we have to the Torah as being, like a relationship between people, in terms of, I think he says something like, the greatest love affair is the one between the Jewish people and the Torah. And there are other things like, you stand for the Torah as you would, someone who you have respect for. The Torah is there with you like your friend, et cetera, et cetera. And the one that I was waiting for that I did not hear, I don't know if it wasn't in the original, I guess, writing or vort that Rabbi Sachs gave, but I was waiting to hear, and the Torah is like a baby as well. I think that's something that I have a little bit of a sense of. I remember the first time someone gave me a Sefer Torah to hold. I was a little nervous, and the woman who was passing it to me said, "Oh, don't worry, you already know how to hold it. It's like, holding a baby or a toddler, I guess, depending on the size of the Sefer Torah." And that also kind of reminded me of, I guess, a comment that I had gotten from Rabbi Ewaschuck when I first presented this work, in which he said that he initially thought that the woman in the foreground was holding a baby, which she isn't. She has, a bunch of linens that she's bringing to add to the rest of the donations. But what's also in her basket is a copper mirror, which in the Midrash Tanchuma is said to have been used along with the mirrors of all of the other women to make the kior, so the big basin in which the Kohanim would wash themselves before, doing their work in the temple or in the Mishkan, in this case. And the interesting thing about that is it's this kind of lovely little subversive midrash in which Moshe actually doesn't want to accept any of the mirrors because, of what they represent in terms of vanity and, perhaps promiscuity, but, God says, not at all. Like, these are kind of like the most prized gifts to me, because if it weren't for these mirrors, we wouldn't have this generation of people who are now, here building the Mishkan and, serving God and Torah. And so, yeah, that's another way in which these kinds of ideas about close relationships come into this. Of course, there is a limit placed on the donations that can be given. At the beginning of the parsha, we have, this statement of kulish esher yadvenu libo, to bring all of these gifts. So, everyone who is so moved, whose heart is moved to contribute can do so. And then, in one of the following parshiot, we find that, the people have brought, they keep bringing things and, it's too much. And Moshe needs to tell the people to stop bringing everything, which I think also makes that stand out in terms of accepting the copper mirrors. It's not that like there was a surplus of things, but these were Dovka things that were accepted.
Maxine, your Torah flows. It continues and continues. So I'm just
to wrap up.
There's so much. Yeah, if there's final concluding thought or something like that.
And a final concluding thought. Yes, and I guess just this phrase, this other phrase that I have in the corner, thank you, Bria, for pointing out the first, is another one that, refers back to the idea of marriage and of the kind of formalization of this relationship. On one hand, it is the closest and kind of most personal thing possible. On the other hand, it is something that does have a certain structure and, I guess, agreed upon terms that I guess can be a bit ambivalent and difficult to, I guess, figure out in terms of too much, not enough, and all of this, but it's a process of figuring that out. Thank you.
Incredible. We actually do have some time for questions or a comment or two, because I don't think Yoshua Hooper is here. But yeah, if there's a comment, a question, I'll just say one little piece. As you were talking, what stood out to me was you said your natural medium is not in painting, but it's in material, right? It's like in sewing and stitching together. And so here in the desert, you have this like openness, and what does the desert call? It's like something completely new, and you have this wealth of gift through the materials that are brought, and the materials themselves are just in these piles, and it's like you can feel that momentum of like, where do these things even come from? Right, these gifts, these materials. And when you're talking about the Mishkan, of like building something that is supposed to house, let's just say, God, the most immaterial, but in the material, you really get this beautiful contrast of striving for abundance and giving over generous. Like, how do we even express that love and connection? It's like with all this material world that we have. And when you made that connection to a baby, it's like when there's a baby in the midst, as Regina was saying before, the next generation, like we want to give everything to that love. Or if it's in a couple, there's like this generosity, and it's almost like, where does it even come from? Somehow, even in the desert, all the material comes, and it's like, it's so abundant. So there's so much depth in, and also that story that you were sharing of how it came to be. Just wanted to point out some of those reflections. And maybe one more comment, if there is any in the group.
Yes. I live in Manhattan and travel to the different neighborhoods, including those neighborhoods where the city is not going to do your neighborhood garden. You have to do it. And I have found that that's so great, because there's always 2 or 3 older women who gather the kids and the teenagers and build the garden. And the kids, instead of expecting the garden, make the garden, volunteer for the garden. And it is an education, it is an opportunity, it is a memory as they go on towards adulthood. So in poverty is wealth.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. All right, everyone. We're taking more Torah and more wisdom. Thank you, Maxine Lee, for all of that nourishing Torah